Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, a nationally ranked community-focused bank with over 30 locations throughout Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, and North Carolina. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more.
What's up, Hokie Nation, and welcome into episode 400 of the Tech Sideline podcast. Sure, it may be transfer portal galore, there may be some coaching staff changes, but there's still a bowl game to be played. Virginia Tech and Minnesota coming up in the Duke's Mayo Bowl, and we got the whole football crew on set to break it down. So with that, let's get it rolling. Episode 400 of the Tech Sideline podcast starts right now. And Happy New Year, everybody. We're recording on Monday, December 30th, 2024. Last ever podcast in 2024 from our high-tech studio in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, and refer the show to a friend. And head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content. Subscriptions are just $12 a month for loads of content. And for Virginia Tech students, as always, your subscription is free. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. The Tech Sideline podcast is also brought to you by the Hokie Way. The Hokie Way thanks Virginia Tech fans for their support of our mission to leverage student athletes' name, image, and likeness in support of charitable organizations. To learn more about us and the organizations we support, visit thehokieway.org to learn more. I'm your host, Carter Hill, filling in for Giovanni Heater. To my right is our lead analyst and columnist, Chris Coleman. Across the way is our senior staff writer, Andy Bitter. In the fourth chair is our managing editor, David Cunningham. And Nick Brown is producing behind the scenes. Guys, Happy New Year. Episode 400, Chris. How does it feel? You've probably been here for 375 of them?
Probably so, at least. Yeah, something like that. We sat here all year and wondered, wow, I wonder when episode 400 is going to fall on. And here it is previewing a bowl game that probably nobody's going to remember 5 years
That's true. Now. That's true. And then, Andy, you came along last year, but you've been probably on a fourth of them at this point. It's been quite a bit.
Maybe. We do a lot of them. So, yeah, that would make sense around that much. Not nearly as much as this guy, though.
Yeah. How was everybody's Christmas, by the way, and holiday week? Good?
It was good. Yeah, no complaints.
Good. Relaxing.
Went to the casino.
Ready to get back into it.
That's right.
Yeah. How was it?
That was pretty good. Got a sports book there.
And you won lots of money, is what you're telling us?
No, it's not. But it was cool. I'd like to go there like maybe this summer and just, play some small bets on baseball games and just sit there in the chairs and watch all the games on the big screen. That'd be pretty cool.
You heard it here first. Chris
sounds
Coleman
like a whale. It's a big whale over here.
I was going to say, Chris Coleman will be at the casino at 2:05 for the Tigers and Twins on April 19th on a Wednesday afternoon.
Boy.
But what about you, David? Good Christmas?
Yeah, it was good. Nice to see family, and I will say the transfer portal, it continues to churn and it continues to be random. Virginia Tech football got, since we last talked, the three of us recorded a brief thing before Christmas. I think Tech has 6 commits since then, so it's a constant moving thing.
I watched Die Hard for the first time, actually.
Really?
First time?
Break. First
oh
time.
my gosh.
It's a good Christmas movie.
I disagree. Not a Christmas movie.
It is a Christmas movie. What are you talking
though.
about? The big Christmas is central to the plot of the movie.
I just don't think it's... I think
ho,
it takes
ho,
place
ho
at Christmas
on the guy.
time.
Yeah, come on. Stop this. It's a Christmas movie.
I'm sorry. Great movie, though. Great movie. And then last thing before we really get into everything. Andy, East Carolina, NC State. The brawl at the end. Is it a melee? Is it like a kerfuffle? How do you categorize that?
I'll be honest, I did not see it live.
Oh, no.
So I'm not quite sure how to classify it. How many haymakers were thrown in that thing? Was it some actual, or was it just guys like...
It was
just guys like sort of milling about and kind of
No,
there were
shoving
8
and
guys
pushing?
ejected.
Okay. I'm gonna have to go to my committee on this one and figure it out. I'll get back to you with the answer
Please
on
do.
that. But
Please
it's
do.
up there. It's probably in the Donnybrook brouhaha range there.
More than a
know if-
kerfuffle.
I don't think it would be quite a melee because that you need like both sidelines. Like fans need to be involved for a melee.
The band is on the field. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's up there, but it's not all the way at the top of the list.
Okay.
If the worst thing that happened is a guy got shoved into a referee and he kind of got a bloody face, then I don't know if it's quite a melee at that
Okay.
point.
I think for a full-fledged brawl, you would need like the police to come out there like with their paddy wagon and just start throwing players in the back. That would be a full-fledged brawl.
In my opinion, when you get to the melee level, it's got to be something just like Malice in the Palace, like they're fighting fans, or those hockey fights where the guys go in the stands and they're hitting people with their own shoes.
Yeah.
Or like a goalie fight in hockey. Like this has gone off the rails at this point.
Yeah.
This is beyond the scope. But I don't think this one was like that.
By the way, happy birthday to 3 GOATs, LeBron James, Tiger Woods, and Will Stewart. He turned 60 years old today. So happy birthday, Will. He's out of town.
Sure, he appreciates you noting that.
Yes. Will is younger than 60 years old. He looks great, though. Looks great. All right. Kind of looking at Virginia Tech. Before we get to the bowl game, there's still quite a bit to hit on, whether it be new coaches, the portal, and I think the biggest thing to talk about is Matt Moore as the offensive line coach. What was you all's first reactions when you heard the news, and how does he fit into Virginia Tech?
I thought it made sense. He was a guy whose status was up in the air because of the West Virginia coaching staff changes, and he made sense from a couple standpoints. He's a proven coach, but Virginia Tech needs offensive linemen, and this is a guy who's a proven coach who could also bring a player or 2 or 3 with him.
Seems like he will too.
It seems like he will. He's already brought one, well, assuming he stays committed, which I have no reason to believe that he won't. But I think you don't want to say. Like, the term home run hire gets thrown out too much, but, like, this was as good a hire as you could hope for Virginia Tech because it checked both those key boxes. Like, someone who could bring players with him and someone who's a good, experienced coach.
Like every coaching hire, I'm just going to say, I don't know. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's absolutely going to work. How many times have we seen that been, oh, this guy's a home run, can't miss. And then it's like, Tom Herman fired at Texas after a couple of years. Like, it just doesn't work that way. So we'll see. We'll see how the fit works. I think, like Chris says, it checks a lot of things. He's recruited the region. He's recruited well. He's recruited well head-to-head against Virginia Tech. You look at, what's his name, Wyatt Milliam.
Yeah.
A guy they, supposedly had some interest in Virginia Tech and ended up going to West Virginia. He pulled Doug Nestor out of here from the portal, going back home into West Virginia. So he knows the area. He knows how to recruit around here. And, we'll see if he meshes with the staff. But I have to imagine if they hired him that he probably will.
And there are players on this Tech team that he did recruit.
Yes.
Like he offered Tommy Ricard. He offered Lath Gannam. I think he recruited Brody Meadows. So he's already has some familiarity with parts of the Virginia Tech offensive line. So I think it's as good a fit as you could possibly hope for.
I think what is so curious from my perspective is he seems like he's been very active in the transfer portal over his time. Maybe not every single year, but he's been able to kind of plug holes. And I mean, with him already, bringing in his own guy from West Virginia, I mean, he's already brought in half of total transfer portal offensive linemen from the last 3 years under the previous 2 coaches, right?
And the previous 2 haven't played.
Yeah,
basically.
Right.
This guy's a proven starter.
That is what is the most curious to me. Virginia Tech has not been able to figure out transfer portal offensive linemen under the last 2 position coaches. Can Matt Moore figure that out? Because the Hokies are going to have to get some this year just to get some depth. But I think he obviously has a very, very long resume. He's been offensive coordinator at a bunch of different stops. He has a lot of experience. I think he's a pretty good fit. Obviously, region ties make sense. But it's also one of those things, like Andy said, where you don't really know until you see it shake out. And what is it, Andy? Like the seventh or eighth position coach on the offensive line?
I think
like
technically
the last 12 years?
you could call it the 8th since 2012.
Yeah.
If you're considering Brian Steinspring part of that, because he was coaching tackles and tight ends at that point.
Gotcha.
So it's been a lot over the last decade plus.
Well, David, you did a breakdown off of PFF about, you look at what Matt Moore has done in West Virginia the last 6 years compared to what Ron Crook had done, Joe Rudolph, and then obviously Vance Weiss here at Virginia Tech as well.
Yeah, well, Vance Weiss had some really, really, really good offensive lines, but when you look at what Matt Moore had been able to do at West Virginia, his guys were just consistent. Like, dating back to 2019, his 6 years there, only one time was his starting 5's PFF pass blocking grade below 70. Like, that is pretty good overall. And he's had some really, really good teams. I want to say this year's team was like around 80. So he's been able to develop some pretty good offensive linemen, but never really had just necessarily a bad offensive line, if that makes sense. I think what Virginia Tech has experienced the last couple of years is just some pretty bad offensive lines back to back to back. So I'm interested to see his development style when we get a chance to talk to him. And he's not coaching the bowl game, by the way. But once we get a chance to interview him and talk to him and see who he brings in and whatnot, it does take some time up front. But that's why I think it's so important that you get transfer portal guys that can come in and play. And that never really seemed to be something Crook and Rudolph, the two previous coaches at that spot, were necessarily good at. So he's a guy who has proven results, and regional ties kind of makes sense, but it doesn't necessarily translate to success.
And the thing, too, with him is it's not even his fault, but it's no secret. Next year is a make or break year for Brent Pry and Virginia Tech. So the results need to be pretty apparent immediately, which would make the transfer portal, as it always is, very, very key for this upcoming offseason.
Yeah, so it's a good thing the Hokies start off with 2 SEC opponents next year.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, South Carolina and Vanderbilt in back-to-back games to open the season. But yeah, Virginia Tech, they do need to improve on a 6-6 record. And I think that goes without saying. You don't sit here and say, oh, if he doesn't have this exact record, then Virginia Tech's going to make a coaching change. I have no idea. But at some point, the corner has to be turned, right? And you feel like that should probably start happening by year 4. Should have happened in year 3, but it didn't.
With this roster, yes, it should have happened this year if it was going to happen, but it didn't. And we'll see how he does with a vastly different roster next season.
All right, so now I pose this question. You guys kind of hit on it, but they already brought in Thomas Remack, I believe is how you pronounce it. Is that correct?
I think that's right.
Thomas Remack coming in from West Virginia. There have been 4 West Virginia offensive linemen that have entered the transfer portal. There are currently 2 that remain. 1 has committed to Virginia Tech. Remack was in all Big 12 linemen at WVU, and he was the highest grading offensive guard, according to Pro Football Focus, in the Big 12 last year. So he's a big get.
Yeah.
What are the chances Virginia Tech can kind of pull those remaining 2 from the portal and slot them right into the starting lineup next season?
Which 2 are left?
Let's pull up the names.
Tuner and
The center.
no, Johnny Williams committed.
Johnny Williams committed to Missouri, but he's a left tackle.
Okay. So,
The one you just said, Nick, is the center.
Tuner.
No, not right. Now he's a guy who was a true freshman this year, and he redshirted, and he was also injured. But West Virginia was very, very high on him. Virginia Tech will need another center. Because right now you're looking at Tommy Ricard. He's going to start the bowl game as a true freshman, and he's backed up by a walk-on. So there's got to be some competition at that spot.
Sullivan Weidman.
Sullivan Weidman. Did he commit somewhere else yesterday, though?
UMass.
Yeah, he's going to UMass.
There's another offensive tackle who redshirted somewhere in the portal, and I think he's scheduled to visit in January.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll wait and see. We talked about the offensive linemen, and again, David alluded to it at the start of the podcast, but me, Chris, and David sat down last Monday and did a transfer portal update, and that was the first 6 commits of the transfer portal class. But since then, Virginia Tech has secured 4 more commitments. Safety Joseph Reddish, the younger brother of Quentin Reddish, coming in from Division II Wingate. Defensive back Isaiah Cash from Sam Houston State. Offensive guard Thomas Remack from West Virginia. And running back / wide receiver, and Andy, you pointed out he's probably going to play wide receiver at Virginia Tech. Cameron Selden coming in from Tennessee. What kind of stands out about that group coming to Blacksburg?
I think Virginia Tech has upgraded their safety room from a talent and a depth standpoint. I think that this group of safeties they're bringing in will be more productive, more consistent than the safeties they put on the field this past season. So that's what stands out to me. And it's interesting that they're getting these safeties to commit, and on paper, they don't know who their defensive coordinator is. Maybe that shows that they already have an idea of who their coordinator is going to be. They just they can't announce it yet.
We sure about this Cameron Selden one? Sure that one's locked up? I think maybe don't put that one in the secured column yet. Right. Some messaging that we got about stuff. He's definitely, they're looking at him as a receiver on this one. You go to his Instagram and he's got... His latest post is like something about don't be believing what people are posting, stuff like that. So I think if I'm a Hokies fan, I would like to hear it from him.
Right.
Okay. I should say reportedly.
Yeah, I mean,
there are 4 guys.
Listen, these guys these portal guys at On3 and 247 are very good. They have a really good batting average. It's not completely perfect on this one. One said he's signed. I don't think that's true at all. Another one said he is committed to, and committing doesn't mean that you're actually locked into it. And in this case, I don't even know if it's quite committed yet. There might be something a little bit lost in translation here, but we have reason to believe this is not just like done at this point.
Okay.
So will be interesting to watch. I think if I'm a Virginia Tech fan, I'm like, if he could go out there and actually post something himself saying he was committed here, I would feel a lot better about this one.
He's one of those Virginia guys that is trying to bounce back from a Power 4 school that is coming back to Virginia Tech trying to make an impact like APR had this past 2 years. That's probably a fair way to categorize what he would do in
APR, Kelvin
Blacksburg.
Gilliam. They've had a couple of those successful, high profile guys, high recruits that went out of state for whatever reason it didn't work out, coming back home. I'm sure that's the pitch that Virginia Tech is making to them. I think they're going to have to continue making this pitch to them. If there's still some time here before the semester starts. So I don't think this recruitment is quite over yet. So that might be something to watch.
And then safe to say Virginia Tech still has quite a bit of work to do in the portal, whether it be on the offensive line, defensive front, the linebacking core. Obviously, you need a linebackers coach and a defensive coordinator.
Yeah. I mean, I think Virginia Tech at almost every position. I think they're done at safety. They're done at corner. They only just signed multiple offensive linemen, a couple of wide receivers, a defensive end, a defensive tackle. Certainly would be nice to have a proven inside linebacker on the roster for next year with a lot of experience. So, yeah, there's still plenty of positions that are still being recruited by the Hokies.
And then do we have any sort of time frame on when we could see a defensive coordinator? After the bowl game, after maybe a team in the playoff is bumped out?
I think if it's somebody who's still coaching, then they've got to get knocked out. And then that's when the official HR process happens, where they go through HR like any other Virginia Tech employee. That takes a few days. I wouldn't imagine that it would be too much longer. But again, if it happens to be someone who's coaching in the playoffs, then I don't know, when does that team get eliminated? Is it this week? Is it the next week? I just don't know at this point.
Well, I mean, there's still a lot of non-playoff bowl games to happen in these next couple of games, too. Remember the first year when Tyler Bowen got hired, they waited for a long time. Everybody knew who it was going to be at that point, but it took a long time for that to happen. So I don't think it'll take quite this long. I don't think they're waiting out somebody in the NFL playoffs or the NFL regular season, I guess it was, with those Jaguars. But it'll be interesting. I'm not sure what direction they're going with this one. Because honestly, I think you need to find somebody that's going to come in that's done it before, that can make an impact right away, that's not going to be, learning on the jobs. Like, that's something I hadn't encountered before. It's like, no, you need somebody who's seen that before and can adjust right away. That was the problem the first time with the hire that, a lot of people pointed out when they made 2 first-time hires as their coordinators. So this is one you have to get right. And I guess in that sense, if they're not rushing it, that's probably the best sign.
All right. Well, to the bowl game itself, because I promise this is a bowl game preview, but we wanted to hit on the portal and the coaching updates and all that before we talked about the Hokies and Golden Gophers, Virginia Tech and Minnesota in the Duke's Mayo Bowl. That is Friday at 7:30 on ESPN from Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte, North Carolina. And of course, the home of the Carolina Panthers. The line is currently Minnesota minus 7.5. We'll see if that changes based on what we hear from Brent Pry throughout the week about who's playing, who's not, but we'll see. To me, guys, before we get to the matchup, the one thing about bowl season, I get like, a lot of it has lost its luster recently, but one of the cool things about it is the newness. Virginia Tech and Minnesota have never played before, so a little bit of a new opportunity down in Charlotte for the Hokies and Gophers.
Yeah, you always get, not always, but sometimes you get the opportunity to play someone that you've never played before. The opt-outs make it really, really strange. The opt-outs in the transfer portal, like I was in the gym watching Oklahoma and Navy the other day, and I didn't have the audio on, but then get a slack from these guys talking about, I think it was from you guys that pointed out to me that Oklahoma had 25 guys in the portal or something like that. Like they played that game with like a quarter of their roster not even available. And they lost it, of course. Are
you making an excuse for an SEC team losing a bowl?
No. Their coach is on the hot seat for a reason, right? But I'm just saying that I don't know, man. Fans spend money on these games and things like that. But then again, that's if the fans want to do that, that's their decision. They know what they're getting themselves into at this point.
Minnesota, to me, is an interesting matchup. I grew up in Minnesota. That's where I was born and raised in Eden Prairie. I was never a huge college football fan because Minnesota was not very good when I was growing up. From like they had the one Lou Holtz here, and then John Gutenkunst, and followed by Jim Wacker, who was terrible. His phrase was like "Jizo Bezo." That's what he was like. This old guy. He goes "Jizo Bezo." We almost had that one. That was like his phrase about that. And after that, they had Glenn Mason, who was like. All right, he brought them the respectability, and they were ranked a couple times. They beat, I think it was the day that Virginia Tech beat West Virginia on the Shane Graham kick. Was the day that Minnesota upset Penn State earlier in the day.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Yeah, that was a
Glenn Mason win.
Remember those
good
two
memory
awesome
right
running backs Minnesota had? One of them went to play for the Cowboys.
Marion Barber the third.
Yes,
and Lawrence Maroney.
That's right. It was like the Lee Suggs, Kevin Jones of Minnesota, and those guys were really good.
So I actually covered the Gophers once in a bowl game when UVA played them in the Music City Bowl in 2000. What year was that? 2005. But Glenn Mason was all right. They got him out of there after he blew a huge bowl lead against Mike Leach. Just like a 30-point collapse in the fourth quarter. They're like, that's enough. Get rid of him. They brought in Tim Brewster, who was terrible. He was a salesman. He couldn't coach anything like that.
Oh, he was Mac Brown's top recruiter.
He was like, oh man, they're bringing in recruits.
Imagine that as a Mac Brown coach.
Yeah, they're bringing in recruits they've never seen at Minnesota, and then they got on the field and they were just awful. Like, you sure you could recruit, you couldn't coach, and then they brought in sort of the exact opposite in Jerry Kill, who I'm not saying he can't recruit, but he sure can coach, as we've seen over time. Kill left with the health problems. Tracy Clays comes in, left under sort of a cloud there, the way he left. I'm not going to get into that whole thing. But then PJ Fleck's been there for, close to a decade here.
8 years now.
And he's done quite well. Yeah. I mean, they had an 11-win season. That's rare at Minnesota. I mean, they won national championships back in the 30s, but I think they've only had, 2 post-World War I 10-win seasons, and he's got one of them. So I know there are more games than there were in the past, but that's still pretty successful. And now they kind of find themselves in the same place a lot of schools are at. It's like, man, there are a lot of good teams in the Big Ten. It's tough to sort of elevate into that upper tier there. But it's a solid, respectable program now. It wasn't when I was growing up, and that's why I was never a big college football fan until I got to Wisconsin for school. But it's an interesting matchup because I think they got a really good defense, certainly an offense that's trying to figure things out, but a very solid team, and I think a well-coached team with PJ Fleck.
Yeah, Sky Yuma row the boat. It's still, I guess this is Ski Yuma. Sorry. Yeah, PJ Fleck coached a game here at Lane Stadium in 2014, Western Michigan.
Right.
Yeah,
about that.
Yeah, he had like he had like the sweater vest thing, and then the tie underneath it. That was his signature look. I think that's before he had the shaved head. But
okay,
yeah,
that was back to
well dressed on the sideline.
That was back to the Jim Weaver days, connection wise, correct? With Western Michigan coming here,
I believe so.
That makes sense.
Well, they were Central Michigan, right?
No, it was Western Michigan.
He was Western.
Yeah.
Okay.
Man, he took the Broncos to an undefeated season, Cotton Bowl appearance before leaving for Minnesota.
He's a solid coach. He was always regarded as one of those up and comers. Which big job is he going to get? We took the Minnesota job, and he stayed there for a long, long time, longer than anybody really ever would have expected.
It's like Matt Campbell.
Yeah,
it's like Matt Campbell and PJ Fleck. I'm both surprised they've stayed at their current stops this long. Because I feel like, especially after the 11-win season that Fleck had, I'm like, okay, he's going to turn that into something else. Or Matt Campbell takes him to the Fiesta Bowl or whatever it was. I'm like, okay, he's going to move on to somewhere else, and they haven't. So I mean, I guess he's probably getting paid north of $5 million, $6 million, whatever it is in the Big Ten. Everybody in the Big Ten gets paid that much. So maybe it's just like, all right, I'm doing fine here. I've got security. I don't need to go somewhere else.
It's a fan base that if I win 7 games, they're going to be ecstatic.
Yeah,
it's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, went 11-2 in 2019. So he definitely said his fair share of success in Minneapolis. But looking at the Virginia Tech roster situation, I will preface with it is a very fluid situation. I think we'll find out a little bit more this afternoon when Andy heads down to Charlotte for media day. And again, for open practice. And there's a press availability with Brent Pry and crew. And then you'll be down there all week. So we'll gather more information. But here's what we know so far. These are the guys who are not playing for Virginia Tech. Daquan Felton has declared for the NFL draft. Jalen Lane, NFL draft. Antoine Powell-Ryland has declared for the NFL draft. Aeneas Peebles is heading to the NFL draft. Dorian Strong is also heading to the NFL draft. Xavier Chaplin transferred to Auburn. He's not playing. Monster Delane's going to LSU. Braylon Moore's going to LSU. Kelly Lawson to UCF. Mose Phillips to Missouri. And then both Chance Fitzgerald and Gunnar Givens, who could have seen time in the bowl game, are heading to Vanderbilt. So they will not be playing for the Hokies. Technically, Bayshal Tutin, Caden Moore, and Keontae Jenkins haven't declared for the draft, but they were not seen at practice. So I guess we'll have to wait and see when it comes to that situation.
Today, when we're recording this Monday, I'll
Yep.
be down in Charlotte in about 3 hours after we're done recording this, and they'll have an open practice. So we'll have a good idea of who's here for the game. And I don't think they'll put out a depth chart or anything like that. Little gamesmanship going on, and the Big Ten's got its own injury report that they put out with stuff. So we'll see later today, but we'll have a good sense of who's playing and who's not.
As a whole, though, Virginia Tech is going to be pretty shorthanded. I don't think it's to the level they were 3 years ago for the Pinstripe Bowl, particularly with the depth, but Hokies are going to be down quite a few key guys in this contest.
There's more depth on the roster than there was in 2021. So like you're not going to be playing walk-on receivers and walk-on safeties and things like that, like you were doing in that game.
Or an H-back at quarterback.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, actually,
Carolina had to do it the other day. Carolina ran
that's the
direct
way.
snap to the running back.
Yeah, sometimes that's the way it goes in bowl games. But yeah, Virginia Tech, they've got a deeper roster than they did a few years ago when they went through that miserable experience against Maryland. I don't think this one is going to be non-competitive like that one. Minnesota's missing a few key guys too from their defense. They're missing Cody Lindenberg at linebacker, who's their leading tackler. Ja Joyner, a defensive end who's been a good player for them, and I think with his 14 and a half career sacks, they're also missing a starting cornerback. Generally, I would say, okay, this is an opportunity for Virginia Tech offense to take a step forward and to take advantage of those defensive losses, but the Hokie offense is going to be without 5 or 6 starters in its own right. So even though Minnesota does have some key guys opting out, they still won the battle of opt-outs when it comes to the month of December. It's sad that I had to dedicate almost 700 words in my game preview, which is released today. Maybe you've already read it by the time you're watching the podcast. Maybe you haven't, but I had to dedicate about 1/4 of the preview to who's playing, who's not.
Yeah, I think the big, you look at Tech's roster, and I think their spots that it's like, okay, they're not in that bad a shape. I think the O-line is one you look at and you go, oh, how are they going to get by in this game? I mean, no Chaplin, no Braylon Moore. That's 2 starters.
It's their 2 best starters, in my opinion.
Perhaps no Cade Moore. He wasn't at practice, so I don't know what his situation is. Again, we'll get some clarity here today. So if you're down 3 starters on a line that it wasn't exactly your strong point all season to begin with. I mean, they were all right. I don't think they were as bad as people said sometimes, but you rush for 300 some yards in the games. They're doing something right up front, but to be missing those pieces, and then how do they fit together? They don't have their coach from the season. I mean, they sort of do. Brent Davis was doing a lot of coaching during the season as it was. So I think that's the spot going up against a pretty good Minnesota defensive line that gives me the most worries if I'm a Hokies fan. I'm looking at that going, ugh, how is Pop is exciting in the backfield? He might be running for his life in the backfield too if they get the kind of pressure that I expect them to.
A lot of opt-outs, but at least these guys have either opted in or opted out of the bowl game. There's no, we'll play the first half and see what happens, and then not play the second half.
That
so
yesterday. Interesting.
would never happen
Speaking
anywhere
of Matt
in the
Campbell,
ACC.
he got a nice win courtesy of Cam Ward.
did.
It's halftime
He did.
decision.
Well, it was 31-28 at halftime. It's not like Miami was blowing them out,
that's
and then
true.
Cam
That's
Ward
true.
opted
Do you
out.
think they win the game with Cam Ward in the second
I
half?
think they have a better chance of winning
Yeah.
the game. I mean, the backup quarterback didn't do anything. I mean, pretty bad stats.
It would help if Miami could actually play defense.
That's true.
They were too
That's
busy
true.
fighting each other on the sideline. Did you see that? Some taking
melee.
swings at each other
What
on
a
the sideline.
program. What a program.
Yeah, that was something. But yeah, the Cam Ward situation is kind of bizarre. But yeah,
Did you see the stat out there about Miami? Is that since 2008, Bobby Bowden has more bowl wins than Miami does?
really,
Oh my God.
I knew they were like.
2-1, I think is what the stat is.
I knew they had been horrendous in bowl games recently.
I remember that time they played in the Sun Bowl against Notre Dame, and the Irish just hammered them. and they panned to the sideline, and Miami players were like having a snowball fight with each other on the sideline while their teammates were on the field getting thrashed.
On this one, they were fighting on the sideline as Cam Ward was throwing a touchdown. It's like that's the U is back if that's the case. They're fighting on the sidelines and scoring touchdowns at the same time. That is great.
Yeah, not ideal for the Hurricanes in Orlando the other day, but hey, that's college football nowadays, I guess. But I guess what do you want to see from Virginia Tech in this game for you guys? Like, I mean, obviously the Hokies are shorthanded, but there is an opportunity. If Virginia Tech does win the game, it's a winning season. But beyond that, like when you look like the layers beneath, what do you want to see from Virginia Tech on Friday?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to win the game, first of all, of course. I don't think it's likely with all the opt-outs. I'm not even sure that I would pick Tech, even if most of those guys were playing based on how the year went. But what I want to see is there's going to be an opportunity for a lot of young players in this game. If you read my game preview, I went position by position, and I highlighted a lot of the young players that are going to get playing time in this game that maybe you're watching the game on Friday and you're like, who's that? So I went through each position and put the player's name in there who's gonna be playing and put his number in there so you'll know who you're looking at. But for me, it's looking at some of these young guys. How does Dante Lovett play in his first start? How does Thomas Williams play in his first start? Do Josh Clark and Christian Williams get time at cornerback? And so Derek Jones is going to have a much better idea about his cornerback room after this game is over than he did when the month started. How does Tommy Ricard play at center? I think Tommy Ricard's got a bright future. I was really high on him coming out of high school. Playing a defensive front like Minnesota in his first collegiate start as a true freshman is a tough ask. But if he goes in there and holds his own, then I think the future looks bright. Webb Davidson, a true freshman, is in the two deep on the offensive line. At defensive end, you'll probably have some of your redshirt freshmen and maybe even true freshman Derek Dandy get more action to make up for the snaps with APR being gone. With Aeneas Peoples not playing, you're going to have Emmett Laws get some snaps. Maybe even Gerard Johnson get some snaps. Those are two true freshmen. So this is kind of like a spring game, except it's another team and it counts against your record. Or for your record, depending on how you look at it. But yeah, look at this game as like a spring game. You get to see some young players play for the first time.
Yeah, I'm interested in seeing the young players, but I'm also interested in seeing the game plan they concoct for this thing. It's like, okay, if this staff has it, like put together a good game plan over this month. I know you're missing a lot of pieces, but we've seen Tyler Bowen dip down to his third quarterback this season and put together a plan and an attack that can go out there and be pretty effective. So how can you mitigate some of these offensive line losses and misdirection and what kind of things can you do? Screens to get it out quickly to offset some of the pressure that they're doing. I think this is a real test of these coaches, and then certainly defensively. Not having your coordinator not there. You got Brent Pry and Sean Quinn and even Bud Foster a little bit, I guess, formulating the game plan on that side. What kind of plan can you put together? Now, not necessarily can those players go out and execute it perfectly, but if you can have a plan of attack and it's like, all right, you gave your very best effort in this one and you put this team in the best position to win, I'd feel a little bit better about this staff going forward. You've seen some of that in the past. Like it was that Camping World Bowl against Oklahoma State.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Where Tech was pretty big underdogs in that game.
Cam Phillips didn't play. Remember, he had the hernia.
Yeah, I think they were like 10-point underdogs. In that game. They were significant underdogs, and if not for like a botched mesh near the goal line between Josh Jackson and Stephen Peoples, I mean, they were running it down their throats earlier in the game. They really took it to them. They had a nice fake punt later in the game. I thought they executed that game plan very well, and I remember Fuente after the game was kind of just like bummed out. He's like, man, we had him.
They really outcoached.
We had a game plan and they had it effective. And like, he was legitimately bummed out that they didn't win that game because he thought they had things set up to do it. So that's what I'd like to see out of the staff. It's like, go out there, have a really good game plan. Even if you don't win, can you go out there and put this team in a position to win, even though they're, pretty significant underdogs?
Yeah. David, anything to add in that sense?
I think a combination of those two things. It's like you've got the opportunity to see a lot of these young guys. How can you make a game plan around them, right? Like we obviously know what Pop Watson brings a little bit. You got some younger running backs down there like Jeremiah Coney, a guy who broke off some some pretty big gains against a team like Syracuse earlier this year. Like, there's talent there. It's not like the Pinstripe Bowl where, again, your receiver with the most catches is a walk-on.
Right. Now you're throwing in a couple of former 4-star receivers.
Correct. Like
Right.
Chance Wiggins, Keelan Adams. How do you use those guys? Can you get to Kai Heath opportunities that would have gone to a guy like Jalen Lane in other games this year? Like, the personnel might be slightly different, but these coaches, honestly, I feel like in some ways should be very excited, because I don't want to say you're playing with house money necessarily, but I mean, you kind of said it, Chris. It's like a spring game, right? You've got an opportunity to go out and test a bunch of different things with a bunch of guys who these are real reps for them against a different team that, this is not something you can replicate in a practice environment. So I'm very interested to kind of see, like Andy said, how Tech comes out and what Tech tries to do, but also what do some of these young guys look like and where do they fit in the game plan? Because I think you might see a guy or two, have a pretty good game, play a certain way, do something well, and it's okay, make a mental note of that, because that kid might have a bigger role come the spring.
You say house money, like, I mean, this feels like it could be sort of a kitchen sink game. Just go out there.
Yeah.
There's no pressure. I don't think anybody's. Yeah, I don't think anybody's. I don't think anybody's really expecting you to win. Minnesota actually has. Let's say it's a seven game bowl winning streak. So they actually have like something that they're trying to keep up here. For Tech, I feel like nobody's really expecting them to win. They got a bunch of backups in there, young guys who don't know better sometimes. They just go out there and just playing, run some trick plays and stuff. You could be dangerous as the underdog like this, especially in bowl season where, teams kind of pull out all the stops. So I think it could be a fun game to watch if they approach this thing right. If they go out there and they're like, well, we got young guys, we got to be limited in what we do. We're just going to run basic vanilla stuff so they can execute it. Like, that's not, don't do that. Go out there and have some fun with this thing. Even if you lose, at least have fun with it.
And Sean Quinn was kind of assuming the defensive coordinator role throughout bowl prep. I guess we'll see if he is the play caller for the game itself. Brent Pry mentioned that we'll wait and see closer to time. I don't know if we'll get any clarification of that this week, but do you expect Sean Quinn to call plays, Andy, or is it going to be Brent Pry?
I think so. I don't think Pry wants to go backward to where he was calling plays before, especially when he's mentioned, that takes away from his game management operations, which haven't been great to begin with. So you don't want to detract from that to start with. Barring Bud Foster coming out of the booth to come down there on the sidelines, which I'm not saying is going to happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen. So I do not think that's going to happen. For the record, I think it's probably Quinn calling the plays in this game.
That would be like, who's the guy? Barry Alvarez of Wisconsin, who coached a bowl game a couple years ago?
He's coached like 3 Rose Bowls since retiring.
He's their AD now, too?
He's no longer the AD.
Okay.
He's the AD emeritus or whatever. But yeah, he was, when Bielema left, he coached a Rose Bowl. When another coach, like, who was that? Who was the other one that left?
Paul Chris got fired.
Got fired. He coached another game. He hasn't done well as the interim coach. I think maybe he won one of those or maybe lost all, something like that. Tarnishing his sterling Rose Bowl record from when he was the actual coach. But yes, it's like, all right, twist my arm. I'll come out of the booth and I'll coach in this Rose Bowl again.
I'm sorry, Chris, I cut you off.
Forgot what I was going to say.
Okay.
So it must not have been important.
That's my fault. That's my fault. No, that's funny about Barry Alvarez. But yeah, again, bowl games are so tricky nowadays when you break them down, because like, who's going to play and what is Virginia Tech going to have? And it's funny, Andy, I read your mailbag the other day before Christmas, and somebody asked, what's your pitch to go to the bowl game? And it's like, you still get a shot to see your favorite team play a game of college football. Bank of America Stadium and a bowl game in Charlotte is fun, by the way. So there still is some upside to this game as a whole. And again, the difference between this year's game and the Pinstripe Bowl is this staff also is not on its way out. So like, there is something to build off of on Friday into what is to take place in 2025.
Yeah, my whole spiel in that mailbag question is like, well, what are the reasons to go and to not go to the bowl game? Like, well, I'm not going to make a pitch not to go to this game. Like, the pitch is like, you have another game this year. Like, enjoy that fact. It's going to be 9 months after this, 9 long months of, transfer portal and positive spring practice stories to get everybody's hopes up, and a long couple months in the summer where there's not a lot of news at all except for like camps and stuff like that. I mean, that's the worst time of year when you're sitting there like, man, I just want to watch a college football game. So it's gonna be a long time until you get to see that again. So I would say enjoy this right now, whether it's a win or a loss. I mean, you get to go out and see your team play again, which is a thing a lot of teams in the country don't get to say right now.
I'll preface this by saying that I'm not going because I'm co-hosting the Bear tailgate show that day.
Are you really?
Yeah,
With
I am.
Nick?
No.
Oh, you do basketball. I'm
He's
sorry.
going to be down there. But Charlotte's
duh.
a fun town. There's a lot of things to do around the stadium, a lot of cool bars. Tech fans should know that right now. The Hokies have played plenty of games in Charlotte over the years. Also, let me put in a plug for the day after the game. Virginia Tech ice hockey
Yes.
is playing an outdoor hockey game in
At the Knight Stadium, Church Field.
at the Charlotte Knight Stadium, the AAA Stadium, which is right next to Bank of America, or pretty close to Bank of America, against UNC.
Yep.
So Virginia Tech ice hockey outdoor game in a baseball stadium. in
Bitter
Charlotte.
hockey rivals,
If-
UNC and Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I mean,
Throw the records out when those two teams meet on the ice.
I'm not discrediting the football team, either Minnesota or Virginia Tech, but the most entertaining sporting event of the weekend in Charlotte might be that ice hockey.
It could be a cool event. Yeah, for sure. I'm not a big hockey guy at all, but I do want to get more involved. And seeing hockey at a baseball stadium, unlike a football game, actually may be kind of cool.
That
So-
makes
If
more
any
sense.
Gophers fans are staying the day after, they're going to look at that and just roll their eyes.
They are.
These ACC teams playing hockey. Like the Gophers are a legit hockey
Yeah, they
program, and for a long time, a couple national championships in their past. So I bet you, believe me, as a Minnesotan, the state of Minnesota would look down at hockey.
Did you ice skate? Did you ice skate growing up, Andy?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
You have to learn it by the time you're like 2. You're out there with like a folding chair on a frozen sheet of ice in the middle of a park, and had one not even like a half mile from my house, a couple sheets there. So you learn how to do that. I played hockey for 4 years, and then at a certain point, waking up at like 3 a.m. to go practice in a frozen bubble in the middle of nowhere, it's not that appealing. So I'm like,
Really?
you know what, I'm gonna switch and play basketball for a couple of years here. It's a little warmer gym. It's at night, but no, I think it's a state requirement. It's like military service in some of these countries.
Okay.
Like you have to do it when you're younger in Minnesota.
Okay. I think they have hockey set up because the Charlotte Checkers are playing there for a game, if I'm not mistaken, which is like the AHL affiliate of the Panthers, I want to say. Is it the Panthers in Charlotte? So that should be fun. But all right, back to the bowl game itself. You look at the roster as a whole too, and just a couple more question marks. It sounds like Josh Fuga is playing, maybe.
What?
He put out a statement saying he had declared for the draft, which Brent Pry had said, if guys do that, they're not playing. And then 2 days later, is like, we'll see you guys at Bank of America Stadium. So we'll see, I guess.
He's down there.
It would be odd to practice, which he was doing before the bowl game, and then opt out of the game.
It'd also be odd for a player who's not like a top three rounds or 5 round draft pick to be like, I'm opting out of this game. Like, what are you gaining by?
Sure.
Yeah, you could use the film. You could use a big game would be nice. I'm not saying like you blow up at the Duke's Mayo Bowl, all of a sudden you're going to get drafted, but it'd be nice to put some more stuff on film for teams to see.
And then a couple more guys that it does seem like they are playing. Malachi Thomas is in the portal, was at practice before Christmas, so we'll see if that has continued. So has Jonathan Penix and Xavier Turner-Bradshaw. Those are 3 guys in the portal that were at practice, so seems like they will be available for the bowl game. And then Sam Brumfield, I guess we really don't know. He recently entered the portal after the Diego Pavia ruling, but I would think he's going to play.
I would
too.
guess you play. I don't see why you wouldn't.
Will Panay appears to be in Charlotte after a trip to France with the lunch pail. I
Yeah,
guess?
how about
was
that?
cool.
The
That was
lunch
cool,
pail
yeah.
got to take a trip to France.
That was cool.
You think that's
Do you think
first
you
I was going to say first international trip for the lunch pail?
As far as I know, yeah.
I don't know. They've played some bowl games in the Sun Bowl, which is right there on the border. You don't think
They
that's
took
across
it
the
across
border?
the border?
You don't think that's across the border?
Did Jack Tyler take that to Juarez? That like on a little
Instead
little
of filling
trip?
up with like little soil, they put a little tequila in there or something like that. I don't know. I think it's probably made its way out of the country before. That might be a question. If I see Bud, I'll be like, has that thing ever been out of the country before?
He would know.
I don't know if he give me the answer.
I don't know if
but
he would know. If it went to Juarez, I bet he.
I was going to say that would be a crazy story if it left the country at the Sun Bowl, but that may be a story
I hope
for
that
another day.
if Panay did take it to France and they take little soil things, they put them in there. I hope he took some from under the Eiffel Tower or something like that.
That's
Maybe
cool,
maybe if we ever get the Detroit Bowl, they can take it to Canada.
Yeah, Canada's
my
right there. Go to Windsor. Yeah.
That would be
Or
a
the
nice,
Bahamas
lovely
Bowl.
trip for December.
Bahamas Bowl.
Give the Hokies the
Yes.
Bahamas Bowl.
Yes,
That would be the one game that would get Chris out of Blacksburg for a bowl
Absolutely.
game.
I would spend the whole bowl week there.
Would you even go to the game?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. No question.
let's
I mean,
look-
I've heard some really fun stories about going to that actual game and things
Really?
you're allowed to do in the stadium.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. Looking at Minnesota a little bit further.
I know that sounded bad, but there's this really
Pause.
funny post. I think it's on Reddit about somebody that went to the Bahamas Bowl. And he was like, "Guys, you'll won't believe what happened when I went to the Bahamas Bowl."
Well, ODU's played in that game a couple times. Now Liberty's playing in it this year, so there should be no like wild shenanigans
How
going
do
on
these
down
like
there.
lower level conference teams get these cool bowls in the South, and the ACC's like, "Well, you're going to Fenway Park in December."
Chris, how would you
The
feel about
payouts-
the Pop Tarts Bowl?
Where's that?
It's in Orlando.
It's the former
Orlando?
Camping World
that's
Bowl.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. They should keep changing
It's
the
been
names on
renamed
it.
30 different
Florida
times.
would be fine. Yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah, I don't mind any of the Florida ones. I mean, I think Boston and New York kind of dumb. Oh, Nick is a Pop Tart, by the way.
He is a Pop-Tart.
Pop Tarts Bowl. Pop Tart. He's going to show
The Pop Tarts Bowl, it's fun, and they've done the whole thing. Have we had enough of it at this point?
I know. I think it was a nice
went
little
maybe a
dose.
little over the top at this point. I don't know. Maybe I just follow too many sports writers who are just like every single Pop Tarts thing. It's like, oh my gosh, they're toasting the Pop Tart again. I'm like, they did that last year.
So
It's
I have
going
a
to
little-
lose its effect over time a little
A
bit.
little breaking announcement here, courtesy of David Cunningham on Slack.
Oh, gosh.
Florida State head basketball coach Leonard Hamilton is getting sued by 6 former players over $1.5 million for missed NIL payments they say he promised. Now,
Well, luckily, it's continuing the positive momentum that the ACC has in
Now,
basketball.
I had previously heard that last season the Florida State players basically quit practicing at some point, like last January, because their NIL payments stopped coming in. And I thought that's an awfully big coincidence that happens the month after football
They
transfer
still beat Virginia
portal.
Tech, by the way.
Right, they did. But
Twice, right?
Yes.
okay, but I don't think it was a coincidence that happened a month after football transfer portal season happened. So, oh my gosh, we need some money for this linebacker to go 2-10 in football.
Bang up
Let's
job
take
with
it
it.
from the basketball team.
Bang up job with the NIL allocation there.
Which, by the way, you know, we'd heard a couple of Virginia Tech players who left the program after this past year were telling people behind the scenes that they didn't think they got the money they were promised from Virginia Tech. Leonard Hamilton's getting sued. I'm sure it's not Leonard Hamilton's fault. It's not like he controls where the money go. He can make promises all you want, but in the end, it's up to the school or the collective or whatever to write those checks, right?
Yeah.
So this is the first lawsuit you've seen of a coach getting sued. Now that's a precedent.
I would hate for him to go out like that, though. Billy Napier at Florida.
Billy Napier.
Yeah, this offseason.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember that. I love the on3 graphic here. It's just a picture of Leonard Hamilton with
That
cast
guy.
Well,
sued.
you know what this means. You know what this means.
Strangely, that's what they put when I got sued by the Roanoke Times. They had the exact same graphic with a big sued underneath it.
Right. You know, this means that Leonard Hamilton probably won't retire now because if he stays employed,
Yep.
then he's protected by the school. Like when Charles Steger,
Do you think he was retiring anyway? He's like,
that's a good
I would
question.
hope so.
He's like,
though.
what,
76 after
mid-70s? He's just-
Larinaga?
Right.
I think he's just chugging along. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't
think
know.
you're right.
All right. Well, I would love to keep talking about this, and maybe some other day we will. But Andy's got to get out of here in a couple minutes to head to Charlotte. So let's talk about Minnesota a little bit. The Gophers are in their 8th year under head coach PJ Fleck. They went 7-5 this past season, 5-4 in the Big Ten. They were, as you alluded to, Chris, in your preview, 3-4 in one-score games. So just some food for thought there. Have lost some key pieces. You touched on that, particularly on the defensive end, but they haven't been hit nearly as hard as Virginia Tech in that aspect.
No, they haven't. They really remind me of like an old school Virginia Tech team, maybe like the 2008 Hokies without a mobile quarterback. They don't have much offensively. If you look at statistically, they're well outside the top 100 in total offense. Tech only faced 2 teams this year ranked lower in total offense, and that was Stanford And even lower than Stanford in total offense was Vanderbilt.
Which is crazy.
Which is crazy
That
to
shocked
think.
me.
Vanderbilt only
Really?
averaged 318 yards per game this year. It was
probably-
it was a whole lot of Diego Pavia running and nobody else doing anything at all.
That's probably one where you probably have to look at like the efficiency
Probably
ratings.
so.
Like where do they rank on that thing?
Exactly. But this Minnesota offense, Brosmer, their quarterback, they got him from, I believe, New Hampshire. Solid season for him. Doesn't do much on the ground. I really do like their running back, Darius Taylor. He had a great season as a freshman last year. Had 4 100-yard games, including a 200-yard game. Hurt his hamstring in the preseason this year. Missed their season opener against UNC, and those hamstrings can be tricky. I don't think he ever fully got healthy, but now he's had a month to get healthy. I think you're going to see the best version of Darius Taylor in this game, which isn't great because the Hokies haven't had good linebacker play this year, and they're missing their 2 best defensive linemen. Flip to the other side of the ball, Minnesota's got a top 20 defense, and they're top 10 in some statistical categories in defense. The efficiency metrics, the F+, they're 12th in the country in total defense. I feel confident in saying that even with these opt-outs, this is the best defense Virginia Tech will face this season. Miami, believe it or not, is the best defense Tech has faced this year, 27th in the country in total defense. But a lot of those stats were padded early in the season, and when their schedule wasn't so difficult. But I think Minnesota far and away is the best defense the Hokies have faced, and they're going to have to do it without 5 or 6 offensive starters.
Some of these SP plus numbers for offense: Minnesota 80th in the country. Vanderbilt was 63rd.
63rd.
Stanford was 88th. So that kind of gives you a perspective. You know what Virginia Tech was? 33rd.
33rd.
In efficiency.
Really?
It's higher than I thought it would be. But so that gives you a sense of where Minnesota is offensively. They're down there. But one name that's interesting on there, Quinn Carroll.
Yeah.
Right tackle, Colin Carroll, long snapper for the Hokies back in the day from, I think he was at Edina High School. It was right next to Eden Prairie where I grew up. I'm pretty sure that was the high school they went to. I know the Virginia Tech recruited him hard. He ended up going to Notre Dame, then transferred back home to Minnesota. So
Trip Carroll was one of the biggest recruiting wins in Virginia Tech history. He was a 4-star recruit with over 80 scholarship offers.
Really?
Just didn't work out and became a long snapper. Yep. The other interesting thing about their offensive roster is their right guard is named Ashton Beers. Great name. Great name. They've got a few. They got a few good names on here. They got a linebacker named Maverick Baranowski. Now that's a great linebacker.
It is, yeah.
Maverick, yeah.
Beers
Maverick
and
Baranowski. That sounds like a
Gears.
nice Polish name from up there in Minnesota.
Absolutely, it is.
Beers and Gears. There's a Gears.
There's
too?
a Gears. There's a Jameson Gears.
Jameson
So
Gears.
you've got Ashton Beers and Jameson Gears, and Derek LeCaptain.
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 Told them it sounds like a seafood restaurant. LeCaptain.
It does.
I love it. I love it. Minnesota's coming off of a 24-7 win over Wisconsin. Sorry, Andy, to close out the regular season.
Wisconsin stunk this year. They were horrible.
They
By the
scored
way-
17 against everybody, no matter who they played.
They were
right?
so bad.
Phil Longa.
That was the worst season they've had in 20 years. I mean, it's maybe 30 years. I mean, it was terrible. To the point where I'm like, is the coach's name? I'm blanking on the coach's
Luke
name.
Fickell.
Luke Fickell is like, get sold
was
a
the
bill of goods here? Like,
was supposed
my
to be the
goodness.
truth, right?
I know. There was a coup that they hired him. He's been terrible since he's been up there.
Took Cincinnati.
Look at me,
to the-
I sound like a Virginia Tech fan talking about the coaches down here. This is what happens when you take the reporter hat off.
That's
and
right.
stuff.
Took the Bearcats to the college football playoffs. So yeah, no, he has not worked out there. Phil Longo, by the way, their former offensive coordinator, is the new head coach at Sam Houston State, and Brad Cornelson was their interim coach for the
Brad
bowl game.
Cornelson, by the way, is now tied with Billy Height for all-time best winning percentage as a college football coach, head coach.
He beat Tulane in
1-0.
'89.
But he lost the game in
Oh,
place
did he?
of
I
Fuente.
thought, never
Yeah.
mind then.
He
So he's
lost
only
to Auburn
500.
that
So
year.
Billy Height's still the record holder.
So Minnesota is coming off of a 24-7 win over Wisconsin to close out the regular season. They did upset a ranked Illinois team on the road in Champaign, and they're still in the top 25 and about to play South Carolina in the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl on New Year's Eve. And then they did get edged out by a singular point against Penn State. So again, they went 7-5, but you could argue this was potentially a top third echelon team in the Big Ten, and maybe has the talent to showcase that as well.
They had a game at Michigan. They kind of got screwed on with this onside kick, to the point that like the league changed the onside kick rule or clarified it the week after. So they
don't see things like that
they basically admitted that they sort of screwed the Gophers in this one. So they're a much more competitive team than maybe I think the 7-5 record indicates.
They lost to UNC in that season opener, and they
missed a field goal at the gun.
They did,
a makeable field goal,
and they were
too.
without their starting running back Darius Taylor, who had gone off on UNC the year before with that hamstring injury. So this is probably better than a 7-5 football team. I think they played 7 close games this year. They went 3-4 in one score games.
You could win those?
Apparently.
Okay.
Yeah, apparently you can win. Apparently, believe it or not, half of those games get won. Yeah,
half of coin flip games usually go your way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So imagine that.
Maybe Friday will be the day for Virginia Tech.
It could be. Like
Maybe.
You never know. You never know. Sometimes these bowl games, you just don't know what's going to happen. They're hard to predict.
You guys mentioned Max Brosmers, their quarterback, transfer from New Hampshire, was very, very good at the FCS level, and he can't throw the football. 67% completion percentage. But he's pretty one-dimensional. Minus 34 rushing yards on the ground to end the regular season.
They give up a decent amount of sacks. I think they gave up 25 sacks this year, and that eats into your numbers quite a bit. But even on design plays this year, he only had 130 yards. He only had one game, I think, where I think his best game was 31 yards. And that was because he had somehow broke off a 28-yard run in that game. That was his only run this year of 10-plus yards. So this is not a quarterback that can break off chunk yardage in the run game like I know Virginia Tech fans are always scared of.
Was Tony Muskett that big of a runner before that game?
I don't know. Good question.
So I don't know. It happens. Yardage happens on the ground like that.
It does.
So.
We'll see what happens with different defensive coordinating.
Yeah, true.
For this game.
You mentioned Darius Taylor, Daniel Jackson, and then Elijah Spencer are the 2 receiving threats for Minnesota. How effective can those 2 guys be against 2 Virginia Tech cornerbacks that, I mean, one of them does have some experience, but 2 very, very young guys playing those 2 roles?
Yeah, they're solid players. They're not explosive. Their passing offense is not explosive at all. They only had 5 passing plays this year go for 30-plus yards. That's 133rd out of 134 teams in college football. The only team that ranked below them was Michigan, believe it or not, who only had 4 such plays. Now, Virginia Tech was only 96th in the country in plays of 30 or passing plays of 30-plus yards, which isn't good. But their number was 14, which is almost 3 times as many as Minnesota, which shows you how far behind the curve the Gophers are. And I expect that's had a lot to do with their overall offensive struggles. So at some point, you got to make explosive plays, right? And
it's tough to put together like a 15-play drive every single time you have to
Sure, yeah. You mentioned Minnesota defensively. They've been pretty, I mean, I don't know if I can use the term elite. They've been pretty close to it all year long. You mentioned they are missing quite a few guys, particularly in the secondary as well. How does Minnesota's losses stack up against what Virginia Tech will not have on the offensive end?
They are missing a defensive end and a linebacker, which helps. But at the same time, Virginia Tech is missing their 2 best offensive linemen. Virginia Tech's missing its starting quarterback. Virginia Tech may be missing Caden Moore, who's probably their 3rd best offensive lineman. They might be missing Bashal Tootin, who's an NFL running
potentially
back.
Their best offensive player.
Yes, exactly. So I think the losses for Minnesota, from a Minnesota standpoint, are unfortunate, but I don't think I think Virginia Tech loses a little bit
you
more.
mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota loses 3 good players off a great defense. Virginia Tech loses 5 or 6 good players off a mediocre offense. So I think advantage Minnesota there.
Okay. David, do you have anything to add on the 4th chair about the matchup as a whole?
Yeah, I think we were talking about what can the Hokies scheme up? What can the staff scheme up? I mean, this is arguably, like you said, Chris, the best defense they faced all year. Pretty balanced group across the board. I'm very interested on both sides. Like, there are going to be some weaknesses for Tech. I'm curious how Pop Watson handles what's probably going to be some pressure. How does Tech kind of put him in a spot where he can succeed a little bit, where he can be comfortable? Because I thought Tech did a good job of that against Virginia. Granted, Virginia, maybe not as much against Duke, but again, that was his kind of thrown to the fire moment. this is going to be a real test for some of these really, really young guys. And I think, like, when we talk about, oh, well, this is Tech's kind of playing with house money, and this is kind of like a spring game. It's like, yeah, this is a spring game against like a really good team. Like, I think Minnesota again is better than 7-5, and I'm curious to see how the Hokies kind of approach this, how the game plan kind of unfolds. I don't expect Tech to win the game, but I do think it may be very similar to that Oklahoma State game you talked about, where it's like you can put yourself in a position to win the game, right? We know Virginia Tech has good special teams. I'm curious to see who ends up returning punts now that Jalen Lane is gone. But
good point.
Maybe
Tucker Holloway.
Yeah, maybe he's back. So, you know, the Hokies have, I think, some weapons at some certain spots. So we'll see how it kind of plays out. But this is a really pretty balanced, I think, Gophers team that just kind of lacks that offensive firepower a little bit.
You guys were talking about it a little bit earlier, but so it seems like you guys envision Virginia Tech maybe run something a little bit funky in this game, some trickeration in a bowl game that...
I mean...
Deceptives. That's what they like to call
I mean,
it.
we've
right?
seen. Well, it's not like we haven't seen any smoke and mirror stuff from Tech ever since the offensive
year and a half,
turnaround
yeah.
4 games into last season. I mean, you'll see some of that. I think Tyler Bowen, when he knows what he's got heading into a football game, does a pretty good job. I don't think it was a great idea, you know, not running your one healthy running back against Clemson this past year, but I don't think, at the same time, I don't think he knew going into that game exactly what he had, how healthy Tootin was going to be, how much he was going to be used, things like that. He's had the last month to know exactly what he's got going into this football game, and he has a much better understanding of what Pop Watson can and can't do. After watching his younger offensive linemen in practice over the last month, he's probably got a better idea of what they can do. So, you know, I actually think the Tech coaches will come into this game with a good plan, and they'll have the team well prepared. Whether they're going to have the horses to execute that over 4 quarters, I have my doubts. But I don't think Virginia Tech's going to go out there and look incompetent or anything like that.
After watching this entire bowl season where every time a team lines up to punt, there's no chance that they're punting this ball. Like, how many fake punts have you seen, including all of James Shebest's greatest hits?
Oh, my God.
Coming out.
That
I mean,
guy.
the basketball pass over the top's been run a couple times. I mean, UNLV ran it. Somebody else ran it the other day. Was it in the Navy-Oklahoma game? I think possibly.
There was somebody who ran it.
It was the exact same design where they, you know, sort of a little pop pass over the top to a guy.
To Mitch, my old personal trainer.
That's right.
That's right.
Anytime
That's right.
Fitness there.
Yep.
Oh, Bowling Green ran the play where they sneaked in the backup
Yeah,
quarterback.
they ran the Chase Mumo
Yeah.
play.
The
And Scott Leffler special.
all these old Virginia Tech coaches.
They ran
killing
that.
it.
They ran that play. They ran that play, and the punter threw it. And I'm like, man, that's a dart from that punter. That guy should be your starting quarterback. And as it turns out, it was the backup quarterback, and they snuck onto the field. But that was another James Shebest special. So it's good to see these come out every decade or so, and the newness of the play is worn off, and everybody forgets about them. It's like, oh yeah, those plays are really effective when they do them.
Purdue just hired James Shebest.
And Vance Vice.
And
Vance
yeah,
Vice.
both of them.
Barry Odom's getting the gang back together.
Yeah,
You want to talk about trick plays or deceptives in this game? Buy or sell 1.5. I guess I was going to say over under, but I was going to say buy or sell. Buy or sell or over under 1.5 reverses for Virginia Tech in this game.
But easy buy.
I'll buy
Easy.
that. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Aiden Green, maybe.
Yeah, they're going
Heath.
What would you
He
have to
throws a pass.
What would you have to put the over under on number of players for Virginia Tech to throw a pass? Because I think 1.5 might be too
1.5.
easy. It might have to
Really?
be
I think
2.5. I think you have to put it up there.
2.5.
Okay, I wonder
I think
how
Watson's going to throw one. I think Schlee will throw one at some point.
Probably.
And then you got to figure they got like a running back or a receiver
punter.
or something that's going to throw a pass in this game.
Well, Malachi Thomas, if he is playing, maybe they do it with him. Although we saw it at Miami, and the pass was so wild. To use a baseball term, he was flagged for intentional grounding.
Yeah,
so,
he was getting pressured. But we've seen him. He threw a touchdown pass last year.
Yeah,
Syracuse, maybe.
Yeah.
NC State.
Yeah.
Watch, we're building this up to be like, oh my gosh, gadgets left and right, and they're just going to run the most straight vanilla
That
game
hand
plan
off
of all
Jeremiah
time.
Coney. Yeah, the whole game. Yeah, we'll see, I guess. I mean, I would root for the trickeration. I would root for the deceptiveness, as you guys say. It makes it fun. So we'll see. You guys ready for predictions?
Sure.
We hit on everything?
I guess I made my prediction like an hour ago before he stepped on the stage here.
All right. Well, do we have wills, by the way, Nick? Do we know? Okay, so just
He
the three.
emailed it to me, and I guess I should pull it up, shouldn't
All
I?
right, we'll start with the birthday boy, Will Stewart.
No, we're not, because I have to pull it up.
Oh, all right. We'll start with David Cunningham then. Go ahead.
I hadn't officially written this down at the time of this because we're posting. Nick and I still have to do our pick and write it down. But I'm picking Minnesota. I think most people are. I'll probably go. We'll say 34. Now I'm second guessing myself.
But this is fun.
I'm thinking like 30 to 14.
30 to 14.
Minnesota.
Okay.
The birthday boy has Minnesota 34, Virginia Tech 14.
Pretty close. What about you, Andy?
I went with 26-17 Minnesota. I thought of going higher with the points for the Gophers, and then I'm like, their offense hasn't been very good. I thought about going higher with Tech's points. Then I'm like, I looked at that offensive line that's probably going to be out there against this defense. I think it'll be they won't have that many points on that side. So I'm going to go 26-17. That gets the Gophers covering this one.
One score game?
Yeah, I think they have that'd be outside of a one score game. That'd be 9 points.
9-point game.
So I think this has the potential to be a bigger win for the Gophers than that. Just I'm looking at the personnel on both sides. I think this could be tough skiing for the Hokies here.
What about you, Nick?
I'm going 27-10. I'm just rooting for the scoring streak to stay alive and to have an enjoyable trip in Charlotte.
That would be
Set the
severe
bar low.
disappointment.
Keep the
That would be
scoring
severe
streak alive.
disappointment.
My goodness.
Yeah, they'll score. I say that, but yeah.
Well, but Pop Watson, Jeremiah Coney, they still have Ollie Jennings and Steven Gosnell. Like, they're not bare to the ball. They should
It's
score.
the offensive line that worries
I mean,
me.
you say backup quarterback, backup running back. I mean, they scored 31 at Syracuse.
Right,
in that game.
yeah.
Syracuse, the only ACC team that can win a bowl game, apparently.
1-9, I believe, in the ACC.
It's not great. I know we say, bowl games, opt-outs, you can't tell what's going on. So you don't want to go 1-9 in the bowl season. That's not a great reflection of the conference, no matter how you explain it away.
And you got 3 left: Louisville, Duke, and Virginia Tech. Duke is an overwhelming underdog. They have a lot of guys not playing. They play Ole Miss,
They don't have
I
their
believe.
quarterback.
Correct. In Jacksonville. And then Virginia Tech is an underdog. Maybe they should be a little bit more of an underdog than they are.
Probably.
And then Louisville and Washington
I think
play in
Louisville's
the
like
Sun
a
Bowl.
3.5 point favorite, something
Okay.
like that in that game.
Maybe the Cardinals will get the job done. Maybe the Hokies will. We'll see.
Maybe.
But,
I got my pick.
oh, yes. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
31-17 Minnesota is my pick. I think Virginia Tech will be competitive in this game. Ultimately, though, what you've got is a team full of backups on a 6-6 team playing a team that's made up of mostly starters from a 7-5 team from the Big Ten. So I think Virginia Tech will compete pretty well, but they're just going to be playing too many young guys in this game against a Minnesota team that overall, I mean, redshirt senior, redshirt junior, redshirt sophomore, fifth-year senior, redshirt sophomore, redshirt senior, redshirt senior, senior. You get my point.
They're
here,
really
and they're starting
solid.
with it.
It's
Yes.
a really solid team. I don't think they're going to wow you, but you're going to go out there and go, okay, this is a pretty tough veteran team that you're going up against.
Exactly.
Yeah. By the way, I don't know how we got to this point in the podcast and we've ignored it, but the winning coach of this game does get mayonnaise dumped all over him. So, if Virginia Tech wins this game, I would love to see the visual of Brent Fry getting doused in mayo.
He would have a time getting some of that mayonnaise out of that beard.
He'd have to wear one of those
Yes.
like oversized hats, like those big Virginia Tech ones, like that, prevent it from getting.
That's
I think
what-
that's what Loxley did.
They had-
It's sort of cheating, if we're being honest.
It is, but
after seeing Shane
Beamer.
Beamer, they dropped the jug of mayonnaise on his head. They didn't realize that this is not going to be like a Gatorade, like it's full of mayonnaise. That's really heavy. So they picked it up, they dumped it on his head, they kind of dropped it on it. So I can't blame a coach
head
for
coach
trying to
gets a
find some extra
concussion.
cushioning up there.
Yep.
They need to design some sort of mayonnaise dumping machine that
Yeah.
can do it for them, so they don't
Bring
have
like
to have the human element to
or
this
like a
whole
dunking
thing.
booth full of mayonnaise.
Yo, that's actually a really good
Wow,
idea.
that is a great idea.
That's a really
Get on
good
that
idea.
Duke's Mayo Bowl.
Next year. But all right, if
Whip it
Virginia
together now. Just find one from the local
There's
fair
still
and
time.
fill it with
Yeah,
mayonnaise.
there's
It's not
time.
like you
Gotta
need
have one
to
down there.
build this thing.
There's still time. If Virginia Tech wins the game, we'll get to see Brent Pry covered in mayo. And if they don't, PJ Fleck will get to show off what it's like to be dumped in mayonnaise, which is, I just can't imagine as fun
Feels
at
like the
all.
losing coach should be dumped in mayo.
Yeah, it really does.
More of a punishment than anything.
Yeah, that's a fair point. David, real fast, we got basketball tomorrow. Virginia Tech heads to Cameron Indoor to take on Duke. Let's ignore that one. We'll look, not ignore it. Let's go ahead and look at what is to come. How do you view the next week for Virginia Tech? On the men, they got Duke and then Miami at home, and then the women play host to Florida State.
This is an interesting week for the women. They've got a pretty good Florida State team at home. It's their of the first 4 women's basketball ACC games to start the year. 3 of them are on the road. This is the one home game, and Florida State's a good team. Kind of curious to see coming off of this break what the Hokies look like. The men walking into Cameron tomorrow might be ugly. I expect it to be very ugly. Speaking of Duke, I read into that Leonard Hamilton suit a little bit more. The players walked out of practice before they played Duke last year.
I've been saying that on our boards for the last year.
So you were right, Chris.
Yep.
And then Tech has Miami on Saturday at home without Jim Larinaga. So obviously that kind of sent ripples through college basketball in the ACC a little bit. So interesting week. Curious to see if the Hokies can get their first ACC win against the Canes.
Lynn Kidd comes back.
Yeah, Lynn Kidd returns to Blacksburg.
Coachless Miami.
Yep.
Well, they have is it Bill Courtney?
Bill Courtney,
Yeah, that's right.
who was
Former
1 year
Tech
assistant at under Seth Greenberg.
Yeah. So, excited to see the women, the men. We will kind of see how that plays out. Saturday could be interesting, but of course, it's a busy week. Football on Friday.
Yeah. Maybe we'll see improvement tomorrow. Hokies played a tight one with Pitt and Castle Coliseum, but Cameron Indoor is a different animal. So we'll see. But appreciate you guys stopping by as always. Happy New Year. We will talk to you guys for the recap of the Mayo Bowl. And then buy or sell, we're going to record later this week. Thursday. So Andy will be in Charlotte. So we'll miss you. But I guess we'll get your
You can
picks in.
FaceTime me in. I could be on the
That's
podcast
funny,
that
actually.
way.
We should do that. But appreciate everybody tuning in. Happy New Year. And we will talk to you very soon. For Chris Coleman, Andy Bitter, David Cunningham, Nick Brown, I'm Carter Hill. Again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you in 2025.